Good morning and welcome to my channel. My name's Nina and in today's video we will be baking some Easter goodies. So I'm originally from Germany and what we're baking today is a German Easter pastry sort of, I don't even know what it would be called in English. It's called OsterZopf. We've been making this since I was tiny little mini Nina. And yeah, we really love it and I figured I'd take you along. So the first thing I'm doing here is putting 500 grams of flour, so half a kilo of flour into a bowl. Next we're going to make a little hole in the middle of the flour so later we can put something in there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to grab some milk, so 250 milligrams of warm milk and 1 packet of yeast. We're going to mix that yeast. I'm going to mix that yeast in with the warm milk. Careful that the milk isn't too hot, otherwise it will kill off the yeast. Then we're going to stir that all up. Make sure it's nice and mixed and that will activate the yeast. Then we're going to put 3 tablespoons of sugar in there to help activate the yeast. And leave the rest of the 80 milligrams. Leave the rest of the 80 grams of sugar for later. And mix that all up. And then we're going to pour that into the little hole we made in the flour. I'm just mixing it all to make sure there's no big clumps left. You can leave this sitting till it starts to bubble and froth at the top, but I didn't do that, I just put it straight into the flour. Just pour it in there, and then what we're going to do is we're going to mix it all up and get every last bit of that yeast out of the bowl. The yeast is what's going to make it grow and get quite big. So I ended up getting a lot more out of this dough than I thought I would. So I'm just mixing it up, make sure it's all nice and incorporated and just there's no plain bits of flour there. Obviously wash your hands before you start and between sticking your hands in the dough, which I end up doing in a bit because I figured out that it's a bit solid, a bit too hard to mix it with the spatula. So I'm just trying to get it in there, but my wrists aren't quite strong enough, so I ended up just going in there with my hands. Okay, so I washed my hands and now I'm just trying to knead in all the flour. Just knead it all in there, make sure it's all incorporated nicely. So I ended up getting some more water. It looks a bit grubby because that's just the same container the milk was in. It's just clean tap water, just to make it a bit more liquidy so I could more easily get the last little bits of flour incorporated in there. Once that is all done, I just get the last little bits of dough off my hands. I'm not doing a very good job at it, to be honest, and I went to go get a tea towel to put over the top, and then we let that sit for 20 minutes to run. Okay, it's 20 minutes later, and as you can see, the dough has almost doubled, not quite, but it's getting bigger, so I'm just making a nice well in there and putting in the rest of the sugar. Some melted butter, 60 grams of melted butter, but make sure it's not too hot, so it's just melted and just leave it on the counter for a while so it's still soft but not very hot. And then I put in 1 whole egg. Now I'm starting to realize I should have done this step by step so it's easier to incorporate. but I start out just mixing it all in there and hoping for the best. At this point I realize I should have just used my hands because it's a lot easier. It is quite messy. This won't happen if you just mix in the sugar first and then the egg gradually and then add the butter at the end. I don't know why I didn't do that, no idea. So I just knead this and incorporate it all back in there. This did take me quite a while to do. Once it was sort of incorporated and I couldn't get much more happening inside of the bowl, I decided to knead it more on the counter. I asked Dad to put some flour down for me so that I didn't have to stick my grubby hands in, not grubby, hands full of dough, I don't even know, that rhymed. Yeah, I asked Dad to put some flour on the counter for me and I just went all up in there trying to knead it all together and incorporate it all. This doesn't have to be that messy if you just incorporate bit by bit. Again, I have no idea why I didn't do that, but I'm just asking Dad to put a tiny bit more flour down for me just to get it all nice and worked in there. If it remains too sticky when you're doing this, just gradually add little bits of flour at a time to make it just a nice consistency where it's not sticky anymore. So I've been going for quite a while and now it's almost the right consistency. It's nice and smooth, it's not sticky anymore, it's not sticking to the countertop, and that's exactly where we want the dough to be. I just keep kneading it for a tiny bit longer. Once it's the consistency I want it to be, I roll it into a ball and place it back in a bowl. I use a different bowl for this because the other one was still covered in the very watery, eggy dough. I put some flour over the top because that's what the recipe told me to do, because, you know, the one time I actually listened to a recipe. I pop the towel back over it in a second, maybe? Do I do that? I do that. I definitely do that. Pretty sure I did that. Yeah, so we're going to pop the towel back over and we're going to let it sit for an hour. So once you've let that sit for an hour, I actually let mine sit for 2 hours because I had other stuff to do, but I'm just going to cut it into 4 pieces. As you can see, the dough's risen quite a lot, which I figured out there's a lot more dough than I thought it would be. I'm just cutting it into quarters and I'm going to take one chunk of dough out. And then what you're going to do is flour your surface and then just knead it a little bit. It will shrink back down to a smaller size, but that's all right. We're going to let it rise again in a bit. So basically what we're doing now is just kneading it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to braid it. Because, you know, braiding hair is boring. We like to braid our pastry in Germany. So I'm just cutting it into thirds, and then we're going to roll each piece out into roughly equal length and thickness strings, or rolls, or whatever you want to call it. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just rolling it out, trying to get it roughly even thickness all the way to the ends. Once I've done that, I move on to the next one. I leave the first one lying there so I can see and compare roughly how long I need the next one to be. So I keep working on that. Once I have all three roughly the same height and thickness, I squish them all together on one end and I start to braid them. Because, you know, who needs hair when you have pastry? So I just braid it all the way to the end. Once you're at the end, just squish the pieces back together to seal it off at the end, and we're going to repeat this step with all the other portions of the dough you have. You can just use all the dough to make one big one, but we're planning on just giving 3 of them onto neighbors. Oh my god, I can't speak. So I made 4 smaller ones. When you're done with each one, place it on a baking tray. It should not fall apart when you pick it up. Just pop it on there, and then we're going to put that aside and let it rest. So I didn't film doing all 4 of them, but here are all 4 of them finished and on the baking tray. So basically what you're going to do next is just pop a towel over it and let it rest for another 20 minutes. Once the 20 minutes are over, you can let it rest a little bit longer. You're going to put some hard boiled eggs, just place them gently in there, push them down, and then what you're going to do is you're going to pop it in the oven. So now I have preheated my oven to 180 degrees and I'm going to put them in there, but I realized they've risen quite a bit, so I'm just spacing them out so they're not too close together. Once they're more evenly spaced out and not touching each other, I just pop it in the oven, and I'm going to set the time for 20 to 30 minutes. And this is the finished product. You can do different variations of this. You can dye the egg and put colourful eggs in there. Make sure you use a natural dye. That's not going to affect anything if it gets into the bread, which it will. And you can brush some raw egg on top of the pastries before you put it in the oven. I didn't do that because we're all out of eggs now. But if you do that, it will be just nicer and more golden brown on the top when you pull it out of the oven. But yeah, this is how you make Hefezopf. I'll link the recipe and stuff down below. The recipe I used is originally in German, so I'll link that as well as just a translation of it into English. If you feel like baking it, make sure to tag me on Instagram if you do end up making this, because I'd love to see the finished product.